that we have a creator.
Yeah.
Go ahead and speak, Deanna. I
Number
think we
two
can all hear you.
is that we have inalienable rights.
Okay.
In other words, they were given by God.
Yes.
Number three is the government
Alright.
exists only
Sorry,
to
Deanna.
protect
She's
our
going.
God-given rights.
They're
Sorry.
listing off 5 things, so Kate can write them down. As soon as they're done, I'll turn it over to you.
Number four, there is a fixed moral law.
Okay.
And number five is the consent of government. The consent of the governed, actually, the consent of the governed. So we give our consent. Oh, but that only works under a moral law.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Okay, Deanna's turn.
Yes.
Just a few thoughts on the whole marriage thing. I heard David Barton speak also, and I'm not sure, I didn't hear Karen say anything about this, but one of my concerns was,
Speak up, Deanna. We can barely hear you.
One of her concerns was,
if the government can say, you have to allow gay marriage, then they can require religions to perform those marriages.
Yeah.
And they can say, no, you cannot have marriages done in your temple unless you do all legal marriages. I mean, it's just the one thing gives them a step in the door to completely, what's the word I want? To completely trample on religious rights in general.
And it's a domino effect. Religion and then freedom of conscience, freedom of expression, it all goes at the same time. All of them are trampled.
Family is what you can't.
Right.
Yeah. So I just wanted to bring that up. And then the licensure thing, that's
Yeah.
a favorite of mine. I completely agree. The government has no business requiring licenses, this and that, telling people they can't do it unless they have that. And anyway, that's for another time. But
Yeah. Yeah.
anyway.
Which was a shock to my system when they were talking to me about that. I just got my nursing license, and he's like, well, who's the government to say who's qualified and who's not? And I was like, wait a minute.
Some of the most qualified people have not gone through the dumb little road steps that the government requires.
Amen.
And so they don't allow them to practice, and they are the ones with the God-given gift often.
That's true.
So there you go.
Because they haven't been brainwashed through the system.
Well, and then the
They can
government
use their God-given
is
gift.
saying who can be licensed and not, and then it's telling the people that you have to go to a licensed
Right.
person, and so it's like they are having a monopoly on
Right.
the
They
system.
have control.
And so what I was
Complete control.
thinking, Richard was saying about how important that it's a constitutional thing to have a census, and for records, the licenses can help. But I thought, okay, so the
I think that's
the
a
Constitution
semantics
says census.
definition. I mean, I think that's semantics of words, though. You could certainly have a record of marriage and not call it a license. I don't think it's
Yeah, right.
necessarily a license. When you say license, it's almost like, okay, we're giving you permission
You're
to get
allowed.
married.
Right.
That the government can't do.
Right. And I even wondered, okay, in some of these areas where the government is licensing people or organizations or whatever, if that would be something that could be done privately better, if the record keeping, like what, maybe, okay, so the Constitution says a census, but it doesn't say all these other records that the government is keeping. Maybe those records are helpful, for sure. I mean, we're family history kind of people. It's nice to have good records, but I wonder if there's another way to do records.
But what would the NSA do? Sorry. Just kidding.
Look at how many of the records from family history are from churches.
Yeah.
They're not all from governments.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They're from local churches or local governments, cities, municipalities, not so much federal. So I wonder if that doesn't go to another one of our principles that we're supposed to talk about today.
Yeah.
We go from family, which is the main unit of society, up to our local government. And 21 was talking about a strong self-government.
I want to interject one thing on
So do I, but after yours.
Oh, sorry.
the license. It may be a role of government to issue a marriage license if they can make a law that you have to be at least a certain age, or that, I don't know, maybe there's a law that first cousins can't marry. I guess there's not, but
Some places there is.
if there is a law about you have to be of a certain age, then they might need somebody to verify, you know, like the role of a notary public or some kind of record that say, yes, I attest that this person is of sufficient age, therefore they may get married, you know, so.
Assuming that those laws in and of themselves are constitutional.
Well, see, and that's what I was thinking, and it makes me laugh because my dad just found the marriage license of of his parents, and my grandmother lied because she wasn't old enough. So I'm not sure that the laws are very effective. She just eloped to another state and said, "Yeah, I'm 21." She was 16. You know,
A church can do that, I think, just as well.
yeah.
Yes.
Well, and I think the breakdown on the federal government getting involved in marriage, there's no restraint on it now because they long ago broke the separation of national and state. That check and balance has been trampled over and people don't look back hardly.
It's true.
And so if they left it to the states could determine that, and you'd still have a discussion about the proper role of government, but at the state or other local level. We wouldn't be talking about the federal government.
That's true. And you know that makes me think also that when things go to the federal government, it's much more difficult to keep the higher moral law. The states individually have said, we want to keep traditional marriage. We want to keep our families protected. We want these things, and then the federal government on top of that is saying, no, you can't. So trampling that federal state is so important.
Well, and then they tie the giving of federal funds, which is unconstitutional, but
Right.
to how well states will comply with their guidelines or their preferences.
Agendas.
So
Their tyranny.
the corruption that exists is so widespread that states go along with it to get their cut of the pie,
Yeah.
you know.
So are you saying then would the right way, I'm sorry, would the right way be to have the states all make a constitutional amendment for their state defining marriage, or that the federal government, because some people say let's have the federal government define marriage as between a man and a woman, but if the if the states all do it, then the states that don't do it, then people just move around and get married in different places and their marriage doesn't hold. Logistically, how does that work if it's not from the federal government?
Well, they-
Logistically, it should not be the federal government's call to say marriages one way or another.
Because
It's outside of their jurisdiction.
Yeah.
Unless they had a constitutional amendment and 38 states ratified it.
well,
To
and,
say that, talking about supporting traditional marriage,
Yeah,
then that sets a precedent that the government has any business at all saying one way or the other.
But at the same time,
I agree.
it would be doing what Skousen's talking about here of defending family, wouldn't it?
I don't think
It's
I'm not
a
trying to
moral
be
law. It's a
oppositional, I'm
natural
trying
law.
to
Right, it's
get
a
it.
natural law, and that was really surprising to me. But David Barton at this Celebration of Marriage said the Defense of Marriage Act was the first mistake. It put it in the federal government's court, and it doesn't belong there. By doing that, they opened up a whole can of worms. It should have stayed in the states, even though everybody ran to say absolutely. We defend traditional marriage, and Clinton was so proud to sign it and say that he was the one that encouraged it, which is mind-boggling. But they opened this whole can of worms by making something part of the jurisdiction of the government that really it's not their jurisdiction.
So going back, this was a nice segue back actually.
Sorry.
When you talked, I wanted to go back to my question.
Oh, freedom.
You had said that something about if they can't allow homosexual marriage because they don't have the rights because God never gave them that right.
Right.
You're saying God never gave us that right, but yet He gave us the freedom to do it because people do it. So, what's the difference between a God-given right and a God-given freedom? What's your
There
definitions
isn't.
here?
There isn't a definition. That's agency. people can choose to
Be in
break,
harmony with God's
to
law.
break the laws of God,
Okay, so
but it's still a natural law.
I don't disagree, but it sounded to me like it's breaking with the argument that the government can say homosexual marriage. What I understood was the argument the government could not legalize homosexual marriage was because who were they to give a right, grant a right that God had not given? But I am arguing God did give that right. It's called agency. It's not. It's against His law,
Okay,
but
yeah.
it is a given